Welcome, everyone. I cannot be more excited to have Paul, my friend, my colleague, my buddy, here today, talking about something I've never heard of before, and perhaps all of you have. It is the microflow triad. I am Julia Brisky. I work on the continuing education programming with IHN, among other things, and we are going to chat about that with Paul in a moment. But the microflow triad is why you're here, the missing link in chronic disease and microcirculation. Paul, you are a graduate of IHN from when? It's more, 14 years ago?
Probably, yes. Actually, no, I've been teaching for 17. So
no. Yeah, you graduated in 2007. So okay, that is a long time ago. 17. I can't do the math. You'll be better at that. But Paul is dedicated, to say the least, my friends, investigating, clarifying, and explaining important nutrition issues and concepts, and is a proponent of critical thinking. Yes, I remember your addition, Paul, to our classes about critical thinking in the context of health and published research. He spent 17 years teaching in the core curriculum program at IHN. And he currently teaches nutrition and mental health and clinical detoxification in the ConEd programming at IHN. He took a little bit of a break to update, which you're going to tell us about, the nutrition and mental health course. But detoxification, for all of you interested, is coming up in the late spring, perhaps. As a program facilitator at ISOM, the International Society of Orthomolecular Medicine, Paul implements projects to increase awareness of nutrients and, of course, orthomolecular medicine for medical professionals and the general public. Paul, let us know about the microflow triad, please.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about it a little more in my introduction, but I'll just start by saying I always used to say I have two passions: detoxification and mental health. Now I have three passions for the last year. So if it's okay with you, I'm just going to start with some slides to get the show on the road.
Let's do it.
Okay. Okay, you see the slide?
Check.
Excellent. Okay, so here we go. So why did I do this presentation? Because it basically went down to this. Julie asked me to do a presentation, and I go, well, if I'm going to spend 100 hours on something, might be a good idea to do it in something I'm really passionate about. And this was it. And so, you know what they say, if you really want to know something, teach it. So it's been about a year and a half since I started the first little bits of what I'm presenting today. And and it came about because I was working on our hypertension webpage. So isom.ca, we have a bunch of conditions web pages, and basically we go into the causes, the contributing factors, the interventions, the orthomolecular side. We got some first steps and other things we can do. And so looking through the organization of the page and basically trying to explain hypertension, the mechanisms of action at a very deep level so that I could then explain it at a not so deep level, but still cover everything, doing a lot of research, and I came across the zeta potential. And so that was interesting. That led to learning about structured water. And so this was a new area. There's a little bit of controversy in there. And so that gets me all interested and passionate. And so that's kind of where it all began. Then in 2025 in the spring, I went down to Scottsdale for Dr. Paul Anderson's two we'll call them conferences on certain diseases. And the Dr. Stephen Parcell, he talked about the glycocalyx. And so I was interested in that. I'd heard inklings about it. And so that was one of the presentations I made sure I didn't miss. And so more about that coming up. He showed this slide that changed everything for me. And this is 2 red blood cells in the capillary. And still taken with an electron microscope, I believe. And so the thing about this is the capillaries are 5 nanometers wide, and red blood cells are 7. And so, we all know the red blood cell has to squish down in order to get through the passageway there, which makes sense. You can see it squashed down a little bit. But here's the thing. The red blood cell is still not touching the sides. And so if you squash something down and it still doesn't touch the sides, something must be going on. And so I immediately knew what it was. It was a combination of the zeta potential, structured water, and the glycocalyx. And yes, and so the presentation did go on to talk about it. It didn't talk about structured water, but that was the thing. And I realized, so if this is relevant here, it's got to be relevant everywhere. So we're going to do more on that coming up. So I did lots of research, more zeta potential, more structured water, loss on the glycocalyx. And so eventually I came up with a name and called it the microflow triad. And why? Because I got tired of saying zeta potential, structured water, glycocalyx hundreds of times a day. And so I decided I would give it a name. And so that was it. And so why should we care about this microflow triad? So the 3 things, because they pretty much connect to everything. It's the circuitry or the fluid dynamics that connect to every cell. They deliver the nutrients, they remove the wastes, they're tied to communication. So everything in the body depends on it. And I'm starting to come to the conclusion that this might be the most important thing to consider when working with people. Ever since I started looking into this about 3 months ago, when I was working with clients, I would start making these connections about things. A lot of the things that are going on with people, we connect to well-established, criteria or causes, like antioxidant deficiencies or poor circulation, but also, not enough protein, that kind of stuff. But this is another level above that. And so as I started looking at these 3 things and people's conditions, I started being able to fit them in and going, they may not be the sole cause, but they're definitely contributing at some level or have the potential to be. So I need to know more. And onwards we go. So here's the outline of what I propose to talk about today. I'm going to talk about each of the individual components of the triad as a system, and some of the causes and signs and symptoms of dysfunction of the system as a whole. We're going to take a brief look at some of the diseases and contexts that would most likely have the triad disruption as an issue. And then some of the holistic and nutritional strategies that we can use, and some of the ones that I use in that practice and with myself. So the components, here we go. So the first one is zeta potential. And I heard about this way back when I was a IHN student. Never really understood the relevance of it. And, we never really went that deep either. It's just a piece of a bigger picture. But it is interesting, and it's kind of fundamental to all fluid circulation in the body. And so what is the zeta potential? It's the electrical potential at the slipping plane. So we'll talk about the electrical potential. It's the charge. So this dark blue circle represents we'll say a red blood cell in the circulatory system there. The outside of the red blood cell is negative. So it's got a negative charge. And so the negative charge attracts positive particles. So these aren't protons and electrons. These are positive particles or negative particles that are floating around in suspension in the fluid. So the negative particles lining the red blood cell attract positive particles, which then in turn attract negative particles. And so this becomes a tightly bound red blood cell with some particles around it floating in a fluid. The slipping plane is the distance or the boundary of where other particles no longer interact. They just float on by. So they're not pulled towards it and they just float on by. So the zeta potential, if you took a voltage meter and you put it right here and measured the current there, you would come up with the zeta potential. And so what's the relevance of this? The zeta potential reflects how much particles repel each other in a fluid. So we want particles to repel so they don't clump together and aggregate and things like that. So that's what it is. Now, these particles also interact with the lining of the arteries or capillaries, I should say, actually arteries, capillaries, everywhere. And the linings themselves are also charged. And so there's a zeta potential between particles floating and the linings of the arteries. So the main functions of the zeta potential, having a properly balanced one at the right voltage there, is to keep repulsion and flow stability. So keep the particles separated and so they can flow smoothly through the circulatory systems. And where are we going to find this? The zeta potential is on the blood cells, the vessel walls. It's in things like cartilage, the kidneys for filtration, the membranes there, extracellular matrix, things that lines all the cells. It's in the lymphs, the lymph system, and even the microbiome has zeta potential, right? So this is a short list, but it shows up in a lot of important places. And so what makes zeta potential worse? So here's a list, not necessarily in order of importance, but order of logic for me anyway. So high amounts of positively charged ions floating in or attached to particles in the fluid. And some of the key ones are aluminum, iron, lead, and mercury. So we know all of those are bad, but this, considering that it collapses the zeta potential and causes the clumping, adds another layer of why these things are bad. It also might be one of the main factors of why they actually are bad, right? Acidic pH. So when the pH goes low, we're talking in the fluid now, the lower the pH, the more it disrupts the charges. And so it basically dilutes the charges on the particles. And so interestingly, even in the tight range of 7.35 and 7.45 that the blood's kept at, going down to 7.35 significantly diminishes the zeta potential. And that actually zeta potential works both ways. So going too high as well will actually disrupt it as well, but we don't see that very often. Oxidative stress. So basically, if you're stealing electrons from a system that's based on electrons and protons or positive and negative charges, that's not good. Inflammation, we're going to see damages the structures that support the zeta potential, and it causes oxidative stress as well. We're in a fluid-driven system, so dehydration is going to make everything worse. We'll see how that plays out coming up. Having hypercoagulation becomes a problem because we have these particles that are charged, and if you have too many of them in one location, it starts to disrupt the whole system of the particles and the linings of the tubes. Hyperglycemia damages it for several reasons. Sugar is bad. We'll see that that's one of the things that messes up a few of the other components, but it causes hormone disruption and cascades downstream to cause low zeta potential. And then the toxins, heavy metals, microplastics, which are hot now for a good reason. And the other chemicals that we use to preserve food, keep things from sticking, all that kind of stuff. All of those interfere with the basement membrane that sustains zeta potentials, and so therefore causes problems. Excess heat and cold, so too much heat, too much cold will disrupt the bonding of the particles and the charge that they have. We're not talking about short-term things like cold showers and hot showers or saunas and things like that, although that does actually disrupt it a little bit. But we know that within minutes, the zeta potential returns back to normal. High concentrations of proteins, lipoproteins, immunoglobulins, and things like that, when people are having certain health conditions, the more particles you have, the more particles with charges, the more it disrupts the overall system. Then the last item on this list is the glycocalyx damage, and we'll talk about that coming up. So what are the consequences of the zeta potential not working or being too low? We're going to get sluggish flow of the blood. And so not so much a big issue at the arterial level, but when you get down to the capillaries, where it's really one red blood cell at a time, slowing that down basically leads to something called rouleau, which is these long strands of red blood cells that are sticking together, and then you try to squeeze those through a capillary, and if you have any obstruction in there at all, then it starts to jam up, and from that you get these little microclots. And microclots are, I'm going to say, the up and coming new hot thing. It's starting to show up. There's a bigger awareness of it. We're starting to recognize symptoms of it, especially in kids after vaccination. But unbelievably, there is documentation about microclots going back 30, 40 years, especially in children. And so microclots basically could be equated to like sluggish flow as well. And if you're going to slow down the flow of things like the supply of blood to the heart muscle, then we start to get problems. Things that support a good zeta potential, we have electrolytes, so the minerals, especially potassium, even sodium, which gets a bad rap, but we'll talk more about that. Chloride as well. Bicarbonate's another one that comes up a lot. Citrate. Now, I love citrates. For years, I taught use magnesium citrate, zinc citrate, and it's like, no, those aren't the good forms. Go with the bisglycinate for magnesium. It's always better. And actually, it turns out that citrate is a very good molecule for the kidneys. It's potassium citrate is one of the most alkalinizing molecules you can put in the body, based on how it helps the kidneys process acids. So citrates, we're going to see in a second, the relevance there. Phosphates are supportive as well. Antioxidants, so providing electrons, supports the system, and then making sure you have enough water to keep things flowing. This is a image I got from one of the articles by a Midwestern doctor. I like the Midwestern doctor. It's a Substack. I don't know how I first found him or her. Writes anonymously for, if you read the stuff, for obvious reasons, a lot of political pressure to, we'll say, behave. Very, very knowledgeable. I can tell from the writing, been doing medicine for many, many decades. Anyway, so here we are. Here's one of the slides, or one of the images shown in one of the articles. And basically, chaotropic means leading to worse zeta potential and dissolution of the system. And so, and then stabilizing leads you more to better zeta potential. So the worst molecule or the worst particle you can have is aluminum. And this explains a lot of things, like why is aluminum tied to Alzheimer's? Well, collapses the zeta potential in the brain. And then we get the citrates. And so for me, that was like validation. And there's more, which we'll talk about coming up on that. But we also have like phosphate and sulfates are very important. And I'm going to leave it at that. So Thomas Riddick, who he was actually an engineer, but he got interested in the zeta potential through chemical reactions not tied to the human body, but then eventually started associating and seeing there was a connection between zeta potential and the human body. So did many, many experiments over many years, and eventually came up with this product, which is still available. I just pulled a label off of their website, and it's a proprietary blend of food grade potassium compounds. And so what's in there, it's a secret, but what has been basically pulled out of it, understanding over the years, it's a bunch of different citrates and such a bunch of different bicarbonates mixed together in precise proportions. I've actually compiled all the research on the zeta improving formulas, and I've come up with one, but I haven't tested it yet. So I'm kind of got to figure out how would you test something like, did it improve zeta potential? Essentially, it'll be looking at symptoms and seeing if they improve. There are diagnostic ways, but they are limited to research labs. Okay, so that's it for zeta potential. The second component is structured water. And that structured water, basically, I put this image here in because it's not like regular water. It behaves more like Jell-O. But Jell-O needs little particles to hold the fluids together. Structured water doesn't have the particles. So it's a little denser, a little thicker, and has some properties. It's also known by several names: interfacial water, exclusion zone water, endothelial surface layer water, liquid crystalline water, bound water. There's a few more. Regular water, we just call bulk water. So definite distinction there. If you study structured water at all, eventually you'll run across this book called The Fourth Phase of Water, Beyond Solid, Liquid, and Vapor by Gerald Pollack. He has a few peer-reviewed studies out there, or published research out there as well. I bought the book and I read the book. It was mind-blowing, explained a lot of things that are going on in the world that I always thought about, or sometimes thought about, and go, oh, that's why. So there is, it's basically the foundation for why structured water exists and where it might exist and some of the roles that it does. So the basic premise of structured water in this context, and I'm going to call this the Pollack's hypothesis or model, is that water is no longer H2O like this, but it becomes highly structured. And so we get the composition of H3O2. So if you look right here at the yellow, there's the two oxygens and we have three hydrogens. Now these hydrogens are shared with the neighboring H3O2, and so it forms a matrix. And basically what, according to the model, is we have this sheet that is quite stable. It's actually a little bit three-dimensional, so you could stack the sheets up on top of each other and they would slide. There would be a little bit of the ability to slide back and forth. So it doesn't become a solid, it becomes a structure that has some density there and has some properties, especially electrical charge. Right, so there we go. That's the model. I'm going to compare the two models, the conventional, because there is opposition to this. Some people say, and have actually written papers on it, that look, somewhat convincing. I would say fully or not fully, but I don't understand the science deep enough. It's pretty advanced. But there is some, we'll say, evidence out there that the properties could be achieved through normal conventional models of water. However, there's a few that cannot, so we'll get to those. In order to get into that, I have to talk about what the glycocalyx is. And so it's this fibrous mesh of carbohydrates that covers endothelial cells and other things like red blood cells throughout the body. So that would be it there, these little fibers, and they attach to whatever the surface is, and they basically go outwards from the surface. And so that's what it is. Okay, so to compare the two models, here's the glycocalyx. There's the long little fibers there. And so in Pollak's model, we have the fluid, in this case water, filling the spaces between the glycocalyx, but also stacking up above it. In the conventional model, it's water sticks to or permeates the glycocalyx fibers, but also extends a little bit above due to electrostatic properties. So there's a big difference in the thickness of this layer. When you have the structured water picks up the negative charge, basically extends from the negative charge of the glycocalyx and permeates the water. And so the water becomes, or the surface of that water becomes negative, which attracts a layer of positive charges in the bulk water. In the conventional model, we don't see any of that. It's just water there with no additional charges. In Pollak's model, there's what's called exclusion zone, so particles can't get in it. And so because that hexagonal matrix is very tight and the molecules stick together, right, and they form that hexagonal structure, other particles like heavy metals and other things, environmental pollutants, can't permeate that very easily. So we exclude particulates out. In the conventional model, and we see this, the particulates go right through the glycocalyx fibers there. Now, the other thing with the Pollak's model is that infrared light grows the structure here. It grows the hexagonal structure of the exclusion zone water. So it's mostly infrared light at around 3,000 nanometers that actually does it. But there's lots of research that shows that infrared light expands that layer. It provides the energy to move the electrons off so that you can link up and make the H320, right? Infrared light does not do anything to conventional bulk water. So some things can be explained by the Pollak's model, but can't be explained by conventional model. The biggest one is these large exclusion zones that come when you attach to a hydrophilic surface like the glycocalyx. So light-driven expansion, so that energy, sunlight is actually a big driver of creating structured water. The conventional model doesn't explain why the exclusion zone water becomes negatively charged and then the outside water becomes positively charged. And then this is one of the craziest ones, surface-driven water flow without pumps. So basically, because you have charged particles inside a charged tube, it's basically, you get what's kind of equivalent, or I can describe it as two magnets repelling each other. And so when you have the fluid in the arteries or the capillaries, the charge itself makes it basically unstable. It's not going to sit still and it will move forward. And so I've heard it said, and basically it makes sense to me, is the heart is not actually a pump, it's an impeller. And so it doesn't pump the fluid. There's not enough power from the heart's output to get all the way down to every single little capillary and move the fluid through. So basically what the heart does is keeps it moving in the same direction, and the charge by the system of zeta potential in the structured water basically gives the propulsion for it. I kind of liken it to these maglev trains, where the trains are elevated on magnets and you give it a push and it goes forever. So we do know that in animal studies, the capillaries and the circulatory system moves fluid even before the heart is formed. So that's interesting. So there's a lot more phenomenon, especially in Pollack's book, not tied to the human body, that support the idea of structured water. One of them is, water drops. You see water drops when you put water on a hot surface. They form the little bubbles or balls, and then it takes a while for them to dissipate. But the same thing can happen on water that's like room temperature. You can see it on raindrops on a lake and things like that. That can't be explained by conventional water, but can be by the structured water molecule. There are several articles out there, peer-reviewed, published, talking about the role of structured water and the existence of structured water, giving the whole model some support there. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be, when I say structured water, I'm talking about both models, because the things that we would do and the effects of them are somewhat similar, but things we would do, we would use anyway, depending on which model, or independent of which model we're going to choose to believe. We can actually take some benefit from both models. So structured water means both conventional and the structured water. So the primary functions of the structured water here, the protective barrier to reduce friction. Remember that image I showed you at the beginning there. And functions of structured water that are specific to the Pollack model: it generates a charge separation, stores and transduces environmental energy, which means it pulls energy from the environment, infrared light, heat, and then uses that to make the structured water and keep the charges. And then it drives the fluid movement, like I just mentioned. Where do you find it? Primarily the hydrophilic surfaces, so water-loving surfaces that line fluid spaces. That's for both models. And so the location is going to be the same places as the zeta potential, because the three components all work together. But we also see structured water inside cells. It's what gives stability. It helps regulate protein folding and movement of particles through the different compartments inside cells. So it's not just outside, it's also inside all the cells as well. It's going to line the inner surfaces of the cell membranes, including the organelle membranes. So key things that damage structured water, we're going to see some of these components show up for all three parts of the system there. So oxidative and nitrosative stress. I know I was going to get that word, trip over it. And so like superoxide, peroxynitrate, and all the usual free radicals in the body. Lipid peroxidation byproducts. So anytime you damage lipids, then you're going to change the nature of the cell membrane, the structure of the cell membrane, which is then going to impact the glycocalyx, and it's going to have impacts beyond that. Having low energy output, so low ATP, that is an issue because the ATP provides energy for basically helping the glycocalyx, but then also creating and maintaining structured water. There are things, too many ions, we already talked about a few of them, but especially sodium and chloride in excess. I'm going to talk about sodium here. I spent, I think it was a couple of weeks researching sodium and hypertension because I knew low sodium causes hypertension just as high sodium does. And more people suffer health issues from low sodium than they do from high sodium. And so in my research, I found that there is a range. And so if we go below, I think it is 1,500 milligrams in the bloodstream. 1,500 milligrams a day, we can have symptoms of low sodium. And so we have to be careful because most people are actually not getting enough sodium or not getting enough salt, I'll say it that way. And now the studies that show the sodium's bad, a lot of them will go, okay, sodium, we're talking high sodium foods, processed foods. And so, you can definitely exceed a good amount or a proper healthy amount of sodium if you eat processed foods. If you don't eat any processed foods and you don't do any salt, then there is a risk of getting too low in sodium. I had a client, I think it was a couple months ago, and I had been studying low sodium and the effects of sodium, and he had all the classic symptoms of low sodium. And eventually he got blood work done and he came back and his sodium was actually flagged as being significantly too low. And it was crazy, but it was good to see that there is some reinforcement for the symptoms of low sodium and actually being low sodium. So other things that damage the structured water, low potassium and magnesium. So both as their properties for having charges, but also how they work inside the cells to create energy and maintain the glycocalyx. Low available sulfate. So this one's becoming a new hot topic as well. So sulfate's required to generate the negative charge in those filaments in the glycocalyx. It's required, it's inserted in the red blood cells to maintain the charge there. The list of issues with low sulfate goes on and on and on, but I'm just going to tie it to this topic right now. Having too much glucose, too much urea, too many salts, so too many particulates in the blood, and then heavy metals because of their negative charge or their high positive charges. Other things, dehydration, which we talked about, low intracellular potassium, and that low pH. A couple other things. So high shear stress and turbulence. So shear stress is the stress when the heart pumps. And so there's going to be a certain amount of stress on the capillary when between the pumping of the heart. And then when the heart pumps, it's going to have a kind of a bulb of fluid go through, and that's going to stretch out the capillaries, and that's going to cause some stress there. We actually need that, having that back and forth of expansion and contraction actually helps regulate things like nitric oxide and the way the cells behave and respond and repair. But too much, especially under high blood pressure or in areas in the circulatory system where there are divides in arteries and arterioles, you get stress in those places that can damage the glycocalyx. Excess heat or cold, I've already talked about that, but it's tied to the separation of charge. Getting too cold for a long period of time is damaging. I remember reading a Midwestern doctor saying when he's working with people with traumatic injuries, like sports injuries and things like that, he or she, I should say, no longer recommends cold compresses because they disrupt the zeta potential, structured water, and then actually impedes healing for up to days, apparently. So something to keep in mind. I don't really know what to do with that yet. If I burn my hand, I'm definitely putting it under cold water, at least for a little bit. And then ionizing radiation, which has the property of moving electrons and protons around in a bad way. So If the structured water fails, we get more friction, more stagnation, and then less exchange of things that are being delivered by the blood supply, so nutrients, things that are being removed, like toxins and things like that. And also, hormones, neurotransmitters, that kind of stuff. So the key things that support structured water: infrared light, sunlight is a close second, but maybe a first because it's way more available. Was it 60% of the year anyway, if you live up here, Canada? Hydration, getting a good supply of minerals, and then antioxidants, very supportive. Brings us to the glycocalyx. So these are some nicely taken images of the glycocalyx. When the presenter who talked about this and put this slide up said it took the researchers 7 years to be able to get this image because it's so delicate and it's held together. Like the fluid part of it is also relevant. It's so delicate that basically if you pull it out under normal circumstances, it just dissolves. So here's a image of a capillary. There is the glycocalyx lining it. And then these are all those tiny little filaments. And then there's the basement membrane. So what's it made of? So glycosaminoglycans. And so we got a lot of, check it out, sulfate, hyaluronic acid. And so these are these carbohydrate-based molecules that hold the charge. We got the proteoglycans and then glycoproteins for basically helping stick the whole glycocalyx to the cells. And then basically we have signaling. So the glycocalyx doesn't just make the barrier, it allows things in and out, and it signals to the system and from the system to the cells. We have some proteins in there. We're going to have some mineral ions and other ions, and then structured water layers. And so the purpose of this glycocalyx, if you break it down, regulate the permeability. It's barrier and shear sensing. So making sure the barrier's there, measures that shear force so that it can do things with that information. And then that cellular communication, intracellular communication there. So the primary functions, and this comes largely from Stephen Parcell's talk at the AMP conference, of primary functions of the glycocalyx, a little more expanded. So cell recognition, cell adhesion, protection, controlling permeability, controls nitric oxide release, controls vascular tone, vasodilation, and contains the enzymes, plasma, and more. Just come to this. So in the lining of the digestive tract, we have those enzymes that break down the tiny little pieces, right? The microvilli enzymes. So the ones that break down disaccharides, tiny things like that, those don't flow freely through the GI tract. They are embedded in the glycocalyx. And so our immune components, because we didn't embed them, they would just flow away. So important for the GI tract for a bunch of reasons. And then helps maintain the flexibility and controls vascular aging. One of the big problems that people have as they age is their vascular system starts to age, so degrade. And one of the things that happens is they get too much calcium in there for various reasons, which stiffens the arteries. And basically the protein structure changes and it becomes more and more stiff. And so if the glycocalyx is working properly, it slows down or helps prevent that process. The locations for zeta potential are going to be the same. Our locations for a glycocalyx, same as zeta potential, structured water. So the key factors that damage it: oxidative stress, chronic low-grade inflammation. So things like we see with Lyme disease, what do they call that? Long COVID, other chronic illnesses, bacterial infections, viral infections. They help damage that. And then sheer stress that's way too high. And then low nutrients, the vitamin C, which is required to make the collagen network, sulfate, zinc, magnesium. There's a whole bunch of others, but these are the key ones. And then low nitric oxide availability. And so why is that important? Because in the capillaries and circulatory system, nitric oxide does vasodilation. So it allows basically arterioles to open up and allow more blood through. Nitric oxide decreases intracellular calcium, which is protective. So it kind of regulates the amount that's in there, strengthens the tight junctions. So the spaces, the gaps between the cells, and which is important because you don't want to have leaky arteries or capillaries or leaky gut. And that regulates ATP production. So if nitric oxide drops too low, ATP drops. If it goes too high, ATP goes too high, then it will kind of lower it down, to say it simply. And then it stabilizes the anchoring of those filaments in the glycocalyx. A few other things that damage advanced glycation end products come from cooking things at high temperatures. Oxidized LDL, it comes along, and if it gets through the structured water membrane, it basically can adhere and I'll say scrapes the glycocalyx away, causes more damage. Regular LDL apparently doesn't do that. It's more the oxidized version. Infections, endotoxins, things like that, floating around the bloodstream. LPS is a toxic metabolite of some gut bacteria. They damage it, and then heavy metals and other toxins. Some of the conditions, so just having the conditions actually does not cause the damage, but the context that causes those conditions does. So hypertension, insulin resistance, hyperglycemia, and of course, mechanical trauma. So if you basically get your hand caught in the car door, that's going to be trauma, it's going to damage. But we'll also look at things like strokes and other things where the circulatory system is compromised. So other things, so there are enzymes that break down the glycocalyx, those filament things. So that they're there on purpose because we kind of want to recycle, but they can get overactivated. And so interestingly, these same things show up over and over again. So inflammatory cytokines will cause more breakdown, more activation, oxidative stress, low nitric oxide, local acidosis. So at that spot, too much sugar, ages, and the heavy metals and toxins. So these guys break down the glycocalyx, but they also cause the enzymes to break down the glycocalyx. So consequences of problems with the glycocalyx, leaking proteins, which is not good because that's one of the mechanisms for autoimmune. We have edema, so leaking the fluid out of, say, the capillaries and into the surrounding cells, and then vascular inflammation, which is bad because it causes destruction, but it also can slow down circulation. So the key supportive factors, vitamin C, sulfur compounds, polyphenols, and omega-3s. Okay. So those are the parts as separate pieces, and now I'll talk about them as a system. So there's the system, zeta potential, structured water, and glycocalyx. And so these are the places where the system will show up. And it's quite a few. If you start to look at this, I mean, it is kind of a short list. It starts to look like everywhere in the body. And I'm just going to pull some of the key locations. So capillaries, the lymph system is important because it also has that glycocalyx and the water and the zeta potential to keep things moving through there. All the endothelial surfaces in the body, the blood cells, platelets, lipoproteins. So it's going to have a impact on, the blood markers of cholesterol and other plasma proteins. Shows up in the heart, affects how the heart beats, how the heart gets its blood supply. The capillaries and the arteries, the capillaries that feed the arteries, right? That's important because the arteries are living tissue and they need a blood supply. Liver, and so therefore detox and everything else the liver does, kidneys, detox and everything else the kidneys do, thyroid, adrenals, the lungs. So one of the symptoms of COVID was lung problems. And one of the things that the COVID virus did was collapse the zeta potential and damage the glycocalyx. So we have the eyes, so retinas tied to it, but the rest of the eyes as well, pancreas, and then the brain. System is very important, the brain, because it's tied to not only delivering nutrients and removing toxins, but also moving or how well the neurons and other brain cells function. Okay, so talk a bit about the diseases of context that are tied to it. And so this is a short list as well. I'm going to go, I just want to show you this. It's tied to many of the different systems in the body, which then have associated diseases. And so I'm just going to list them here. So you can see it in atherosclerosis and hypertension, coronary artery disease. It's got a role in diabetes. Starting to look like a very important role in Alzheimer's. There's lots of documentation on the glycocalyx and zeta potential, for sure, published on COVID injuries, tied to the kidneys, degrading eyesight. It's one of the big drivers or main drivers of the lethality of sepsis. And then we have the lymph systems implicated. It's tied to chronic inflammation, and it's a promoter of chronic inflammation when it's not functioning properly. Same goes for neuroinflammation, tied to chronic pain, because if you don't have the system working, you don't have a proper glycocalyx, and then you can't repair the damaged tissue, and you also get accelerated pain signals. Lymph system, when the lymph system becomes leaky or doesn't do its job, then the fluid stays in the tissues or migrates to the tissues. Roles in migraine, tied to circulation and clearance, insulin resistance. Big one in cognitive decline. At ISOM, we're working on our page on Alzheimer's, which should come out early next year. And one of the key things of slowing it down was looking at how the system or the components of this system affect the way the blood works and integrating that knowledge. And then the microstroke thing. And I've seen a lot of people who they kind of gap out for a bit and then they come back. And that is one of the signs of microstrokes. And I'm seeing that more and more. Definitely a lot more after COVID than before, but something to keep in mind. We have increases in autoimmunity tied to the system not functioning properly, poor wound healing, and then detoxification is impacted, and then leaky gut. You need that system to protect the lining, and you need it working to repair it. Okay, so where are we for time? Okay, good. So I pulled some specific diseases and context tied to the many, many articles that I've read from the Midwestern doctor. Here's a kind of a short list. I think I have spent 80 hours or more reading his articles and cross-referencing them, his or her articles, and quite enlightening. And so based on all of that, I've kind of built an understanding of how this system ties into certain diseases, and I'm going to run through a few of them here. Just so what you see is some of the mechanisms tied to the triad dysfunction, and of course, just the triad dysfunction alone is not the full cause of anything. So there's lots of other mechanisms that we all know about for things like, say, hypertension, dyslipidemia, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So start with atherosclerosis. Here we go. So buildup of that plaque starts with low zeta potential. And what happens with the low zeta potential, you get microvascular sludging. So at the capillaries, it sludges up. We get less delivery of nutrients, which means the cells start to function poorly, which means they can't make the energy they need to function properly. The cell starts to degrade, behaves poorly. That causes the glycocalyx lining that cell, so arterial cells, to degrade, which then causes the structured water to degrade. And then we get increased LDL adhesion and then migration through that matrix or that cell membrane to the area below it. By the way, once we get here, we could also do an arrow that goes back to here, and it becomes a perpetuating cycle. With hypertension, a few things. We get damage to the glycocalyx. We get less nitric oxide production, which means less vasodilation, which means tighter capillaries that stay that way. And then the blood pressure goes up because when you have tighter diameters to push through, you have to increase the pressure. One of the things I always found interesting was with blood pressure, why you could have somebody, you do all the good stuff, they have high blood pressure, you do all the good things, and then blood pressure comes down and then it stops, it plateaus at a certain level that's still high. And that is because the system kind of sets that level as the new normal. And then it goes, I'm not going to lower below this. Now, one of the reasons behind that setting of the new normal might be because we've got a damaged glycocalyx that is keeping this system running. And if you address this, then we get more lowering of the glycocalyx or the blood pressure. Another mechanism is so the glycocalyx goes down, structured water goes down, and now we have less repulsion of red blood cells and other particles. The friction goes up, and because friction is higher, the blood is basically more thick. You have to raise the pressure to push it through the systems. Okay, tied to autoimmunity. So zeta potential goes down. The glycocalyx gets damaged because what happens when the zeta potential goes down, we don't build structured water the same way, and the glycocalyx gets thinner and thinner and thinner, and then the antigens that are on the surface of the cells lining the capillaries and arteries get exposed. And actually, it's all cells. They get exposed, and anytime you expose antigens, there's an increased likelihood that the immune system is going to recognize them as bad. And so exposed self-antigens create autoimmune triggers. Apparently, it's one of the main drivers of autoimmunity. And another way it works is you get lower zeta potential. We get reduced blood flow because of the particles clumping up. Then we get less immune clearance, which means the immune cells don't move through as effectively. And so they get clogged up. They don't remove things that the immune system normally removes. So less debris removal. We get increased chronic low-grade infections and more antigens sitting there causing problems. Get into some fun territory here. Spike protein mediated damage. So the spike protein directly damages the glycocalyx, although conventional medicine, for the most part, is not happy with that conclusion. Leads to disruption of the glycocalyx, which leads to less structured water. And then that decreases the zeta potential, which then causes red blood cell stickiness, the rouleau formation, so building those strands of red blood cells, protein aggregation, and then microsludging. And so this explains a lot of the symptoms from COVID. And vaccines, another interesting issue, getting more and more safe by the day. But here we go. Immune activation plus adjuvant exposure decreases zeta potential. And then we get impaired flow, microflow, and then we get the symptoms out of that. Some of them being these little microstrokes, which have been reported since the beginning of vaccination in published research. And then another model there is aluminum adjuvants and the lipid nanoparticles they get into the glycocalyx and they cause this destruction. And then one of my favorites, because I'm passionate about mental health, cognitive decline, low zeta potential, more aggregation of red blood cells, more microsludging, less blood flow, less oxygen and nutrient delivery, and then a lot of things, but in this case, the synapse, so the entire neuron gets affected, but the synapse start to misbehave and they don't communicate properly, and then we get miscommunication, less processing of information and things like that. Another thing that happens, we get inflammation, oxidative stress, damages the glycocalyx, and which decreases the structured water, increases permeability of the blood-brain barrier, and then we allow toxins, inflammatory compounds, immune complex, and things like that into the actual brain cell, or gives it access inside there. And from there, it just causes all kinds of havoc. Okay, so those are some examples. Now let's look at some symptoms. And so I'm going to look at the symptoms individually for each of the components, because that makes a little more sense than looking them all together. When you look at these things, when it comes to symptoms, there's really not a lot of data, because who's going to go and correlate this symptom to, say, zeta potential, or this symptom to glycocalyx? There's more and more of that coming up, but not a lot has been done, relatively speaking. So I divided each of these up into supporting data, and then we'll see. So supporting data for low zeta potential, mildly blurred vision or visual disturbances, headaches, pressure headaches, lightheadedness, dizziness, vertigo, especially if it's transient, comes and goes, slow capillary flow, sluggish circulation, that nail bed test where you press on your fingernail for like 10 seconds and release it. And if it takes longer than 2 seconds to go from white back to red, that is a common symptom or indicator of low zeta potential. Fatigue and general tiredness and weakness overall. Some of the plausible mechanisms exist, and there's some supporting data: cold hands and feet, numbness or tingling in the extremities, the heavy leg syndrome or leg fatigue, reduced exercise tolerance, so can't go as long as you would like to or as used to, and then having that fatigue that's not relieved by resting. Supporting data for the structured water, really not much on that one, just feeling persistently thirsty is a good indicator. Plausible with some supporting data: dry skin that doesn't improve, moisturizers, swelling, puffiness, sensitivity to heat, or overwhelming heat response, because heat affects how the zeta potential works, carries a charge, and then brain fog after heat. Some of the supporting data, sock marks. So when you have socks on and you take them off, and then you see the line where the elastic is there, and then ankle swelling at the end of the day or after standing for a long time, and then things that you might feel when you have inflammation. And then for the glycocalyx, quite a bit for this one. This is a short list. Easy bruising, the spider veins, puffiness after high sodium intake, muscle aching, the little tiny red spots on the skin, dry eyes or eye irritation, dry mouth. And that's it for that. So what can we do about this, or how would we address it? I'm going to go through the strategies that I have pulled together from a year and a half of research. So here we go. Polyphenols. So there's what they are. They protect the lipids, reduce free radical damage, help generate the glycocalyx and nitric oxide. The beetroots, the nitrate-rich vegetables. eNOS is endothelial nitric oxide. So basically improves that production, helps with vasodilation. Sulfur-rich foods, which we need to make glutathione, which is why I always included it. Now I also include it just for building the glycocalyx for those sulfate molecules. Good quality fats and oils helps get the inflammation down and help stabilize the membrane of the cells. Low glycemic diet keeps the ages down and helps preserve that zeta potential. If you study this, you're going to see foods that contain structured water. I have my thoughts about this. It seems highly unlikely that if structured water does actually exist in, say, watermelon, that it will survive the transport through the GI tract and then getting into the bloodstream. If it exists, it would be beneficial inside the GI tract because it would help support the glycocalyx. So there are claims, but these definitely contain bound water, which water bound to the glycocalyx, which is also beneficial. So there's a list there. Coconut water has to be from young coconuts, so it can't be in a can that's been sitting on a shelf. The stuff that's been refrigerated from the time it was extracted probably contain more of it. And then we have the citrus fruits, apples, cucumber, and celery are often cited as structured water ones. Okra, chia, and flaxseed, they don't contain structured water until they meet up with water. So like flaxseed, when you grind it up, add the water, the flaxseed is going to release the tiny little filaments, and then the water is going to be attracted to that. Same for chia and okra. So nutrients that support it, we got the vitamin C, and I don't really need to go deep into these. They protect, so vitamin C is the antioxidant support in the water parts, and vitamin E is antioxidant support in the lipid parts. B vitamins support nitric oxide production, antioxidants, so recycling of the antioxidants and oxidants, methylation pathways that support nitric oxide production. The magnesium, potassium help support the electrical protection or potential and the tone of the microvasculature, which means the ability to expand and contract. Glycine, which is one of my new favorite. Well, it's not new because I use it for detoxification support, but now 2 reasons: anti-inflammatory and supports that extracellular matrix. We got the nitric oxide enhancing agents, so those molecules there. NAC is a good sulfur donor, and supports also glucosamine derivatives and fucodian, which is an extract from seaweed. So certain seaweeds contain these molecules that help support the glycocalyx filaments. One way I know for sure is it interferes with the enzymes that break down those filaments. So this is a new upcoming hot supplement and very expensive supplement too. And then the electrolyte formulations, so they preserve that zeta potential and help maintain a structured water. We do these every time I do a sauna, which is pretty much every day. For the minerals that get lost, but also keeping a good zeta potential helps with detoxification and moving toxins throughout the circulatory system and the sweat glands. So things to avoid, some of the common ones we already talked about, but oxidized seed oils, the cell membranes are made of fatty acids. If you put in damaged fatty acids, they change the way the membrane works. So we avoid those. Chronic stress changes the autonomic nervous system in a way that is damaging. Sedentary behavior, basically we need to keep things moving because we're always going to be doing some small amounts of microsludging. So we want to keep the blood flowing through all the tiny little tubes to keep it from sludging or remove the sludging. And then dehydration. Lifestyle actions, anything that's movement, moves muscles. Breath work especially helps with the lungs, but also increases oxygenation, circulation. The light in the sun are for the the infrared, and to help build that structured water layer. Grounding or earthing. I just watched a movie on grounding that most people will go, oh, it's just imaginary stuff. But you know what? I watched that movie and go, that's basically grounding pulls electrons up from the earth when you stand on bare feet on soil, and those electrons help regenerate the charge or maintain the charge in the particles and in the structured water. Mild cold contrast, so hot or cold showers, massage moves things around, so does lymphatic drainage. Here's my top 10 things that I have been doing for a while, but now I see that they also have been supporting the microflow triad. Drink plenty of water or fluids, daily electrolytes, lots of antioxidants, sulfur foods. So, we'll buy, there's two of us in this household, buy a cauliflower and eat a bit of it every day till it's gone, then switch to broccoli, then switch again. I do beetroot powder in my coffee. Sounds crazy, but yes. Sunlight exposure every day, sauna pretty much every day for 15 minutes, and then get some exercise, typically a good long walk. Grounding, actually, I shouldn't put that in yet. Well, actually, I do. I walk outside with bare feet, even when it's cold. And then desludging. So every morning after my cold shower, I will rub the 8 or 9, depending on how you count it, lymph congestion points on the body. I teach those in my continuing ed detox class, but you can find them out there on the internet as well. And then I also slightly rub all the skin on my body back and forth a little bit to move that sludge that might have formed out. And that wraps it for that. If you want a handout, let me know. Send me an email, paul@healthybyknowing.com, and just put in the subject line handout, and I will send you one. I haven't built or created the handout yet, so maybe you want to throw in your email what you found most relevant or you want to know most about. We're going to take some questions, but just before that, I do have, as mentioned, 2 courses in the works. I have taught these before. I've taught them for at least 12 years, I think, each of them. And what happened over the years, I've been continuously acquiring more and more information, and I've been kind of putting them in patchwork into the courses. What I'm doing now is I am recreating the courses from scratch with the structure to incorporate everything in a logical, easy to assimilate and understand way. So those are coming later next year. If you're interested, you can check out the ISOM website. These are some of the pages that I have contributed to. I've had a lot of support on them. And basically, we go through each of these conditions designed to be useful for medical professionals and the general public. There's also the book, Light on Schizophrenia, which I worked on, essentially put everything together and published it for ISOM as one of my projects. And you can get that on Amazon. And that is it. We can take some questions.
Well, Paul, that was excellent and a lot longer. You're like, oh, I'm so worried. It might be 45 minutes. Okay, so this is you bridging a lot of the quantum nature of things. Like you're talking about fundamental particles in the standard model. Like we're talking neutrinos and quarks and all these sorts of things, which is very interesting because I've always been interested in bridging the concepts of quantum physics with this. So this is amazing. Now I do have a few questions myself, but there are going to be questions coming up. So thank you for this. Very exciting. When it comes to the RBC aggregation, if we're looking at something under a live cell that is dehydration aggregates, lectins affecting red blood cells when it comes to blood type A, shouldn't be eating kidney beans, or lower zeta potential. Does it all look the same? And I know this is all very new, but do all those things look the same?
Do you mean under live cell?
Yeah. Would you think that they would? I'm just asking if you think they would, not that if you had an answer to that.
Don't have an answer.
Yeah.
I haven't really looked into that part yet.
Yeah. Okay.
By the way, I threw out 2.5 times what I presented.
Oh my God! No, I can't imagine. I was just curious about that.
So, but when you see it in a live blood cell, that is definitely the zeta potential. In lack of zeta potential in action, say the rouleau for sure. And I would imagine that the lectins would be affecting zeta potential as well.
Well, yeah. Okay, that would make sense. But I guess the root of everything would be the zeta potential, and then it's going to manifest itself as all these other things. When it comes to all of the symptoms and all of the likely conditioning, or they're not treatments, but lifestyle factors, as you had nicely listed with the sauna, the grounding, everything, that's going to increase zeta potential. Now, I do have another question before. Do you have a structured water system in your home?
No, not yet.
Okay. Sorry, no, answer because I was just looking at it's called Natural Action Water with Dr. Pollock, and I was wondering, Dr. Emoto's got to come up here somewhere. Yeah. Right? So they're researchers in natural action water. And of course, I'm looking at water systems, and I'm like, these guys have full water systems. My question was, are you getting a structured water system?
Maybe eventually. I'm doing more research into, can you actually structure the water with relevant research to back it up, and what happens to it once it gets into your mouth and then goes in the GI tract. There's a lot of good evidence for it, and I've seen the quantum level support for it. I'm still having some issues tying it all together in my brain in a way that makes me want to go out and buy it right away.
Yeah, it's interesting. Back at the Total Health Show and the Whole Life Expo, there were always guys or a guy, can't remember his name, from the States who would come up and he sold structured water.
Yeah.
That was like 15 years ago, 18 years ago. Interesting.
Yeah. I remember I took a short video, which I was going to include in this, but completely forgot about it. When you take water and you run it through turbulence, like through rapids and things, the spiral motion of the water aligns the charges and things, and that's part of what those water systems do. And that might explain, well, part of it, when you structure water, you have to push toxins out. All the particulates have to leave. So on that aspect alone makes it worth looking at.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to ask you about that. Falls, any kind of falls at all, would all have structured water naturally. Of course.
Yeah, there's actually evidence for structured water just existing out in the environment. Pollock basically his hypothesizes that the reason water recedes before a tidal wave is because it's all acting as one big gel sheet that gets pulled out. So okay. Anyway, I'm digressing a little here. So.
Yeah, we'll have to consult Neil deGrasse Tyson on that one. Let's see, Elena. This makes me think of fascia. Is there a link?
Yes, definitely. I remember reading that all fascia is lined with structured water, which would help it move, right?
Okay. No, I don't understand. Grounding when going out is not possible. Elena is saying it's not possible for her. Can be done by spooning?
I'm not sure.
I don't know. With a stainless steel spoon, we're going to need more info on that one.
Okay, but I'll tell you, the grounding, you can...
spooning the feet. Sorry, Paul. She's saying spooning the feet. That's interesting.
In order to ground, you have to have a supply of electrons. So the electrons, the biggest holder of electrons is planet Earth. So you have to have some connection. I just ordered actually a grounding kit. So it's a carbon fiber sheet, and then it comes with a cable, and it comes with a copper rod that you stick into the soil, and then you connect it with the cable, and the electrons come in. A lot of the kits, you actually plug it into the ground of your house. So you have the two horizontal slots, but you never put anything in there. But the third one is the ground that basically supplies the electrons. The building I live in, that is not grounded, so I have to, and I live in the second floor, I have to run a cable out the window and stick the thing in the soil in front of my neighbor's window.
Hilarious. Yeah, interesting. Okay, Elena's very interested. She has another question here. I also see the polarity here at work. So magnets of a certain strength could also correct that. Oh my gosh. The Gauss of magnets versus the Gauss of Earth. Like, we're going back to the Earth here for any answers, no?
Sure. I'm not aware of any connection between electromagnetism and that. Yes, magnets at the useful level, no. But no. I haven't seen everything yet.
Okay, so we question, because this is a lot for all of us to take in. So questions are really tough when you have this kind of information. But yes, there is a lot of work to be done. So you're going to send us the handout, and can I send that to anybody who everybody who registered? Is that possible?
Sure, but what I want to know is what's most important from what I talked about that people would want.
Oh, wow. So you're going to have to make that decision.
Well, okay, then so I'd like people to email me and say, this is my favorite part, or I want to know more about this, or I found this the most useful. That'll help me design the handout.
Okay, so do that. Everybody who is on, please email Paul, let him know what was most useful, what captured your attention, and he will do that. So you sauna every day, Paul?
Yep.
So 15, what kind of sauna do you have?
It's the one where your head sticks out, and called the relax sauna, and it does it's got a special generator that does between 4 and 6 nanometers, and so you get that frequency plus you get heat. And it's crazy because I will get in that, in the top of my head, which is sticking outside, will start sweating before my body's even warm, because the infrared is going through. Yeah.
Interesting. It was Dr. Rhonda Patrick who had said one exposure to a certain degree of sauna. She uses the Finnish saunas. We have a sauna ray sauna. But she says one exposure every week has been shown. Now, this is Rhonda. She is arguably one of the leading experts in sauna. Decreases anxiety and depression. I don't know by what ratio. I thought you would find that interesting, but she full out. Sorry?
I'm not surprised. And in fact, I've actually seen the research too. The effects of like detox will persist for days after a sauna. We know that actually the effects of a lot of different types of detoxes will persist. So, and then there's the whole part of, so it's very hard to be stressed out in a sauna. Well, put it this way, it's very hard to be stressed out in a very hot sauna for more than 3 minutes, because then either you relax or you get out, right? So I can see that component too. And it increases microcirculation, including to the brain. So, yeah.
Interesting. Sorry, somebody was phoning me. I don't know if I cut out there. The other thing I wanted to mention was we both know Lynn Hinton well, and you were talking about foods that contain structured water. And when I was just quickly looking at, this is like super quick, at this website that has both Pollock and Emoto, saying that structured water does not have memory. I'm wondering, because you do a lot of energetic stuff as well, but I'm wondering, can you structure foods that have, or that contain, or that might not contain structured water? Can you do that through the elements and the work that Dr. Emoto has taught us in terms of frequency and...
So that I'm not sure about. I expect there is some degree of being able to do that. I have read that you can imprint water. Independent of what you're just talking about. And there's even some evidence to that in Pollock's book as well. Now, I know personally, I do Reiki and energy work, and I have changed the bad food into good food, just the effect of it. And there's a couple other things that lead me to believe that, it's definitely possible.
You know what, Paul? We've got a few questions here. So I'm going to, Rose. Hi, Rose. What do you take to replace minerals lost in the sauna? Rose is a grad of ours. You would know her, Paul.
I do. So before a sauna, I do 4 grams of vitamin C, 200 milligrams of magnesium citrate. I got to get this right. I do an electrolyte formula, and I take a glutathione. And then in cycles, I will also do 1 scoop of Ultra Clear Plus before, because that's a full spectrum detox support. But I also always do a mix of binders in a jar of water as well.
Rose, you'll have to take his detox course because he goes into detail.
I do go into detail.
Yeah, big detail. And you know what? You have been a champion of Ultra Clear Plus for a long time. But Rose, we'll send out the recording and then you can go to that section or what Paul just said. Is there anything else you want to add there, Paul?
Well, okay, so I'm not affiliated with Ultra Clear Plus.
No. I said a champion. I know you're not affiliated. Yeah.
I think the big reason is I wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for Ultra Clear Plus. So when I was really, really sick with chemical sensitivities, it was, I think it was like 9 bottles of that. So that turned everything around.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. Dana, hi Dana, is asking, have you tried Zeta Aid?
No, not yet. And I'm not sure. I know what the ingredients are from independent sources, and I know the formula, how to build it. So I might actually try it when I work on my formula to do a comparison. So the thing about Zeta Aid is you make a concentrate first, and then you have to dilute it down. And if you don't do that dilution right, you could actually mess up Zeta potential. So you do have to be careful with it. I'm looking at a low grade, the ingredients with available supplements and nothing that would freak doctors out or anything.
Okay, thank you. Rose is saying she took your courses and she loved them.
I remember.
You remember. Okay, good stuff. And then one more thing, Paul, because it's past 4:30, given that you went, you gave us a lot of intel. So this is one more on sauna, which was interesting. So my acupuncturist said that people with weak qi, yin, shouldn't do a sauna every day. Do you agree?
I'm going to say I don't know enough about that. I can hypothesize, but it wouldn't be relevant.
It's true. This is where the significant critical thinking comes in and confounding factors that you would want to know before you even answered that.
Yes.
So, but thank you for the question. Paul, I think we're done. And you get to break free. And
Excellent.
Thank you so much. You're probably going to go do your sauna. And we're very excited about everything. I will personally also send you what I'm interested in, and hopefully that can go into the mix with your decision as to what the handout is going to look like. And really, really appreciate your time going through that and giving us something very novel and very bridging between the physical realm and beyond root cause realm. We're going into, and this isn't energy medicine. And I know you're a Reiki practitioner, and I know your wife's a Reiki practitioner, I believe, and many, yeah. I get it. But this is verifying, it's quantifying, it is allowing us to say, okay, now we're getting close to being able to have evidence behind what is happening. That's what's exciting about what you're doing.
Thanks. It is very exciting, and it's my passion, so I love it.
Very nice. Thank you, dear Paul. We shall talk to you soon, and thank you everyone for being with us this afternoon. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Okay. Bye.
Bye.